We saw a monster.
For fans of nihilistic, brutal slasher movies, have I got a film for you. We are talking The Hunt, and this one is brought to us by Gerald and Michael Crumb, the Crumb brothers, who I've reviewed a few of their films before. And this one stars Donny Boaz as our kind of slasher. And the setup is there is this masked lunatic travelling across America, particularly Texas at this point, and cutting a swathe through anyone he really comes across. And we have these two female social media influencers who are, you know, doing various kind of pranks and stunts for kind of clicks and likes and everything. And they are wanting to do a few kind of particular sort of episodes, should we say, around this particular area. And one of them contains this idea that they're going to be chased around by some type of lunatic. And it's all set up. There's a little bit of kind of fun commentary on how these type of things are kind of set up. And they actually hire an actor to try and dress up as a kind of a masked guy to chase him around, but he drops out. So they basically ask this kind of caretaker of this kind of bed and breakfast where they're staying to do it. But what they don't count on is an actual kind of serial killer showing up and deciding to take matters one step further. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. Now, as I mentioned, I've reviewed a few movies from these guys before. But I have to say, this movie in particular, I feel, is a real step up in confidence in regards to filmmaking to me. It really feels like a level up in regards to filmmaking, because this movie feels has a very clear type of movie that it's trying to be. It reminds me of the movie. The plot isn't really like it, but what I mean is the tone of like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. As I mentioned, this brutal, nihilistic tone, uncompromising violence. It's a film that's taken seriously. It has a couple of moments of levity, primarily from our two sort of social influences, but the kind of the horror element here are taken deadly seriously, and are quite stomach-churningly hard to watch at times, I would say. So let me just kind of go into a little bit more detail as to why I think this movie kind of comes across like this. So we see a lot of our slasher, but it's filmed in a very deliberate style. And this is what I mean by the confidence. So we mostly see our slasher from a kind of third person perspective. So a lot of the time we see it from, like, he's walking in front. And I know there was that film in A Violent Nature where it did it as well. But this one doesn't do it completely like that. We never see the guy's face. We only ever see when he's wearing like a mask, so we never see him like behind the mask. But on occasion, he has to take the mask off and is kind of just walking around as a kind of regular guy. And other characters see him, but we never see him. And he never speaks, but he has this kind of menacing sort of persona about him, even though we never see the guy's like human face, only the kind of the mask. But it's done in such a kind of confident and deliberate way that I think it really works as a filmmaking technique. So this guy, this killer, comes across as uncompromising, powerful, dangerous and brutal, the way it's done. He doesn't speak. But the other thing I think that works as well is that this killer comes across as intelligent. And how do they do that if he's not speaking, you might say? Well, he's clearly sort of toying with his victims, setting things up. You know, for example, I don't want to give anything away really, but there's certain elements here where he is prepping for his kills, shall we say. So he's stalking people, prepping, setting things up so people will come into a situation expecting a certain thing, and therefore they're then trapped and stuff like that. So the guy is not like an idiot. He's not like a lumbering, mindless hunk of meat. He's clearly planning and strategic, but it's done in a way that it shows you that he's doing it, rather than it just be through dialogue. In actual fact, there's no dialogue from our killer, played by Donny Boaz. So I thought that was very, very good, and it genuinely makes this killer seem dangerous. The same way that you thought Leatherface was dangerous, you get the kind of the same sort of feeling. So this is not your ghost face in Scream style slasher. This is one that's taking it, as I say, very brutally, deadly serious. And let's talk about that brutality, because this movie is gory. If you are, I would say it's a hair's breadth from being like extreme horror. Maybe it doesn't quite get there, but it's very, very close. I mean, the gore here is all practical. It's not like little trickles of blood here. There is a lot of blood, and we see a lot of the wounds be inflicted. There's a couple of times that you don't see necessarily, but for the lot of the time, probably 65% of the time, where this guy is, hitting someone with an axe, you see it, chopping someone's hand off or their fingers off. There's one bit where he grabs a guy's hand and he basically sort of pulls apart the two fingers, and then just like pulls his hand apart and things like that. So, and we see that, and it's done in again, it's a lower budget movie, but the gore is effective. It looks realistic to a point. In actual fact, we see some aftermath of some of the kills, and it's people being chopped in half and things. So it's pretty out there in regards to the level of brutality and the level of kind of gore that this movie sort of depicts. The movie doesn't have a huge cast, so we do spend a reasonable amount of time with our sort of protagonists, and there's some issues I have with the protagonists. I'll come on to again in the negatives, but because it doesn't have a massively expanded cast, you at least feel like you get spent time with them, even though I don't think they're especially well developed. But you get to know their day to day to a degree, and you get a broad idea of where they are in their lives, for example. And as I've mentioned, this movie, it has these kind of two social media influences. So we get a little bit of kind of like swipes at the kind of the social media lifestyle and how sort of set up and kind of like fake it is, and how these kind of stunts and pranks that you'll kind of see a lot on these sort of social media style videos that they're not reality. They're kind of just things that are set up for the kind of the camera and stuff like that. Also, having a little bit of commentary about the vapidness and the kind of the fakeness of these types of influencers, and how their personas on camera aren't really a representative of their true kind of personality and stuff. So there's a little bit of kind of levity in those kind of sequences with that, and as I say, but for the most part, this movie is sort of taken, as I say, pretty sort of seriously. The movie also has some stylistic choices in a kind of a non-linear storytelling fashion. So we sort of see different sort of periods through the day and the days leading up to these kind of incidents. We also see it from kind of different people's perspectives. So we'll see portions from like the victim's perspective, and then we'll actually have a portion where we sort of see it more from the killer's perspective. They call it the monster. So we kind of get, we see the events leading up. So we see people that have been killed in one scene, and then we'll see them alive in another, because it's kind of telling you the backstory from someone else's perspective. So there's some kind of artistic merit here in regards to some sort of the way this film is constructed, having it in this this non-linear fashion. For the most part, I think the movie is well directed. As I say, some of the kind of the stylistic choices come across as being quite strong here, and deliberate. So this movie genuinely has a a feeling of kind of confidence behind it. It kind of leaves behind that sort of rough and ready kind of indie feel that some of these kind of indie directors sometimes have, that kind of rough and ready. This would feel like a film that you would see on like Netflix or something, and it would be right at home on there and stuff, and you'd feel it was a relatively reasonable production. They even knacker up a few new looking cars. I was like, man, that's a new car and you've wrecked it, just for this movie. What a shame. Anyway, so I think this movie has some strong choices in it. Before we go on to negatives, let's talk about the tone, because the tone is going to be a sticking point for some. Some people will absolutely love the tone because it is, I say, brutally efficient, uncompromising, violent and gory. But those of you who are put off by the more extreme sort of violence and gore, this may be a little strong for some, I would say. Now, that's not a criticism of the movie. That's more of a choice for you to decide whether you want to watch this or not. So let's talk about criticisms I have outside of that, which I don't think is a criticism. It's just a kind of mentioning it about the tone. So our protagonists, we spend a lot of time with them. This is true. But I never really felt like we got a huge amount of characterization. In actual fact, if we talk about our two female influencers, when we first meet them, they're kind of putting on these weird voices, and we presume this is for their audiences, and then later on they seem to be acting more normal. But the dialogue is so infrequent with them. I actually couldn't really tell if the beginning sections were like a bit that they were doing for their influencers, or if that was just like a weird acting decision, because we didn't really get a huge amount of dialogue, to be honest, from our protagonists. And I think it lacks a little bit of you don't really feel like our protagonists, to be honest with you. Like I said, to the point where I couldn't even tell if some of the acting choices were like meant to be like a caricature that they were doing for the cameras, compared to later on when we sort of see them off. There's not enough of a sample size, so it's kind of like the characterization is rather thin. We have this kind of caretaker guy, and again, it's a little bit like, he's walking around with like this weird doll in his pocket, and we know that he's grieving for his mother. But again, you just felt like he just needed just a tad more in regards to some of just character moments and stuff, and a little bit of building. The problem with this is, of course, is that you don't necessarily feel like you massively connect with our characters, and then ultimately when they're in danger, because you're there, they come across as more strangers than people you feel like you've got to know. I don't know if you necessarily are that invested to a point. So there is that. That's maybe the main critique I would have. The non-linear storytelling is a little bit confusing, I'm not going to lie. At times it doesn't quite pull it off exactly, because you're thinking, I thought this guy died, or it isn't quite flow as well. I think it works as an artistic merit, and I actually think overall it probably works more than it doesn't. But there are times where I just feel that it ends up making the story just a tiny little bit confused here and there, I would say. There's one or two times, and I don't know if this was done as a choice, where the camera's a little out of focus. I noticed 2 times where I'm just noticing the camera is out of focus. And again, this might have been a choice by the Crumb brothers to do this, to try and have this, I don't know, effect. But at the same time, it could have been just your camera's out of focus. And if it was deliberate, it just looks like your camera's out of focus. So there's a couple of like small minor elements here that I felt are a little bit on the kind of the technical elements. And then the last thing I would say is another technical issue is there is ADR in this movie where they've kind of re-recorded lines, and there are times, particularly in the beginning of the movie, where it does sound a little bit sort of artificial at times. This, again, it's hard to kind of really judge the acting, I feel, because I feel that the sample size is not a huge amount, and I think the ADR, again, doesn't do the actors any favours. But when it all comes down to it, it is a entertaining movie if you are a fan of the more harder hitting kind of slasher films. I think if you are a real slasher fan, this is you know, just for you. This is made for you. A return to the 70s and 80s style of slasher films, uncompromising, hard-hitting, gory and brutal. I think you'll like it. I think you're going to like it. 7 out of 10 for me, a pretty strong recommend, I have to say. This is a pretty decent movie. I think it's definitely more than it misses. 7 out of 10, what were your thoughts? Have I made you want to see it? Please do let me know, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.